So what this slide is showing is the difference of thick skin versus thin skin underneath the microscope. In fact, all of this is the epidermis in this view, whereas this is just the epidermis in this view. Now I know the magnifications are different, but what's interesting, you guys, is that this is even has a higher magnification, and you can still fit less of the epidermis in. I'm sorry, the whole epidermis in the entire view. This has a lower magnification, and you can't even really fit the entire epidermis in this entire view here. So in thick skin, you can see it's significantly thicker. Well, what makes thick skin thicker than thin skin? Well, it's really the thickness of stratum corneum. So you can see how this is all just stratum corneum, you guys.
Is it more than 20 to 30 layers?
No, it's 20 to 30 cell layers, but somehow the cells are thicker. Yeah, it's a good question. Then you're going to find stratum lucidum. You can kind of see it's a little clearish here. Then you got stratum granulosum, which is look darker and kind of more granularly. Stratum spinosum here, and then stratum basale, which is a single layer of cells here. And what's this sort of peg-shaped structure right below it? Dermal papilla, you got it. So what you find in dermal papilla then are a lot of capillary loops, so blood vessels that can help nourish the epidermis, and a loose areolar connective tissue. You can tell it's loose because it even looks less dense. Like, see how it looks clear? Because there's a lot of ground substance and not a whole lot of cells and fibers. So it's more nourishing there. Now if you look at the epidermis and thin skin, look how thin stratum corneum is. This is just stratum corneum right here. These little wisps of tissue, right? Then we have our stratum granulosum here. In fact, you might be inclined to call this a stratum lucidum. But you don't find stratum lucidum in thin skin, right? So what do you think? What do you guys think is going on here? Why does it look so clear? Attachment. Yeah, you got it. The stratum corneum is kind of being pulled away. It's just how the tissue was prepared. So when they cut this tissue, the stratum corneum kind of tore away from the granulosum, but they should be attached. So you can kind of see a nice thin layer of granulosum. You got stratum spinosum and then stratum basale. Why is stratum basale so dark right here? Melanin. Good. So you're going to find melanocytes in there. Now the darkest of these are probably the melanocytes, like that one, that one, that one. But the ones that are maybe less dark could just be some keratinocytes. And it could also just be the stain too. Whatever stain they applied may just make these cells look darker. What do you guys think this stuff is right here? See, it kind of looks like the same color as the dermis, right? So what's this? You got it. That's a papilla. So that's a dermal papilla kind of protruding up into the epidermis. It's still technically dermis, but that's still part of the papillary layer of dermis. And that's made of loose areolar connective tissue. You got it. Very good. What about this little white space right here, you guys? What do you think that might be?
That's a vein.
Yeah, good. It's a blood vessel of some sort. So it could be a vein, could be an artery. It looks sort of veinish too, I agree. And it's a big old wide open space because there will be blood in there. So you can see not far from the epidermis, you do find some blood vessels. But do you find blood vessels in the epidermis? No way, because that's epithelium, which is avascular, right? And it wouldn't be very good, right? Considering how much our epidermis can get damaged, you would bleed a lot if there were blood vessels in the epidermis. So what about different like color variations of the epidermis? Well, skin color is really determined by three main factors. It's determined by hemoglobin content, melanin content, and keratin. Hemoglobin is a protein that you find in red blood cells that has sort of a reddish tinge to it because hemoglobin is rich in iron. Iron, when it's oxidized, like you find in hemoglobin, has a reddish hue. In fact, the soil in Colorado has a lot of iron in it. That's why they call it Colorado, color red, because a lot of our dirt here has a really bright red color, especially like on the western slope, right? But our blood also is more red because of its hemoglobin content. So if you have more blood in skin, that's going to give more of a reddish tinge to skin, right? Like, when does skin become more red? Yeah, when you're flushed, embarrassed, or if you're exercising. So you can assume then, if you're embarrassed, you're seeing more blood flow to the skin of your face, or if you're exercising, you're seeing more blood flow to skin all over your body, so your skin can look more reddish, right? And that would make sense from the standpoint of like heat dissipation, because we know we can actually have more blood flow to your skin to help dissipate heat, which we'll talk about here in a minute. What about if skin lacked a lot of blood, and if it lacked that reddish hue?
Pale?
Yeah, you get more pallor, more kind of a paleness to your skin, right? Because when there's less blood, then it's less red, so it looks more whitish. And the reason why it looks more whitish, you guys, is that keratin is white. Okay, and so you have that kind of more of a that keratin component is more prominent, if that makes sense. Now with melanin, it's a pigment that's produced by melanocytes, and it basically is going to be one of those UV protective molecules. It absorbs UV light. Now, keratin is this yellow-orange pigment that you find that builds up in skin. Keratin is beta-carotene, which is vitamin A. Vitamin A is a fat-soluble vitamin, which means it dissolves in adipose, right? So this is one of the reasons why fat is yellow, because it's full of vitamin A. In fact, if you guys ever seen like a really deep cut, and like you can see that really bright yellow of their adipose, have you ever seen it before? Yeah, it is pretty gross. The reason why it's so bright yellow, it's not because fat is yellow. That's not true. Fat's actually kind of whitish. The reason why adipose is yellow is that it has keratin dissolved within that, right? So if you have a lot of vitamin A in the adipose near your skin, it makes your skin look more yellow or more orangish, right? In fact, what are some foods that are high in keratin?
Carrots.
Yeah, keratin. Yeah, exactly. Or leafy greens. Those have a lot of vitamin A too. So
I've
if you
seen someone like eat a lot of carrots in their skin.
It does.
Like it was, yeah.
Yeah, it does. Seriously. If you already have pretty white skin and then you go on like a carrot diet, that could make your skin look more orange, more yellow, because you start to accumulate vitamin A in the adipose near your skin. So it's kind of interesting.
Yeah, it was a little weird.
It's kind of weird. Kind of like, it looks like one of those like fake tans, right?
Yeah, no.
Like a Kardashian kind of tan. How about melanin, you guys? What's its function again?
Natural
Sunscreen. You got it. So what we see here then is a melanocyte, and all humans have the same number of melanocytes. What differs though is the activity of melanocytes. There are hormones that can make melanocytes more active. We call this melanocyte stimulating hormone. It's released by your pituitary gland, your brain, and the hormone can stimulate your melanocytes to become more active and make more melanin. Now that's also stimulated by like UV exposure. So we know that you can become more tan when these melanocytes become more active. And like if you genetically have a darker or lighter skin tone, that's based on sort of the genetic activity that's associated with your genotype. So it's kind of interesting. And it would make sense like if your ancestors are from a part of the world where there's a lot more sun, you would want to have a lot more natural sunscreen, right? Or if your ancestors are from a part of the world where there's not as much sun, you don't need as much natural sunscreen. So it's kind of interesting. Now, melanin, there's two forms. You got reddish yellow and brownish black. And the color differences are due to the amount and form of that melanin. It's produced by melanocytes, same relative number of melanocytes in everybody. Now, what happens, you guys, is that the melanin can actually migrate into keratinocytes, and it forms these pigment shields for those keratinocytes. Now, freckles and pigmented moles are large accumulations of melanocytes. So if you got a freckle, it's basically just a little area of skin, but there's a lot of melanocytes in that little area, right? Instead of being spread, they're accumulated, so that makes skin look that little area a little darker. Same with a mole. So a mole is a nevus, and that's also an accumulation of melanocytes in blood vessels. Now, what's interesting is that freckles and moles can be precancerous. Not always, but they can be. And so one of the original thought processes of humans not long ago was that freckles and moles were the mark of the devil. Right, that like if you had a freckle or mole, that's like where the devil touched you, and where they touched you, that left a little freckle or mole. But if they're precancerous, which could kill you, I can kind of understand why people used to think that, no, like thinking that like if the freckles where the devil touched you and that leads to cancer, that could kill you, right? I can understand that line of thinking. We understand that today it's probably not the case. Like it's probably not the case that the devil touched you and that's what caused all the moles, right? Although you can't really prove that because there's no way to measure devil, right? But we know that it can be associated with genetic factors or sun exposure, right? And sun exposure can lead to more moles, which can lead to cancer. Yeah.
That's what I was going to ask about. So sun exposure, like what about sun exposure creates that concentration of melanocytes?
I don't think that's an easy answer. I don't know if the answer is really clear yet. There are definitely genetic factors. Like we know that some people are more prone to forming moles than others, right? And most of the time, these moles form early on in adulthood, and then you should stop forming new moles as a middle adult, right? And when you're elderly. If you have new moles that are developing, like in middle adulthood or in old age, those are most often associated with precancerous growths. But it's not to say that all moles are precancerous, especially the ones that you develop, as a young adult or a child. But it's important to get those checked out because you never know. I mean, like they could turn into a cancer. Yeah.
Kind of like this spot, like, actually gets a little bit bigger. They're just white. Like it's like a white freckle. What's that? Is that just where
It's
there's
just a little.
no-
Yeah, you got it.
Okay.
There's no melanocytes there. It's a little hypopigmented spot. I've got those too. Yeah, so it's interesting. Just that it's an area of skin where there aren't as many melanocytes, so it even looks whiter. Do you have a question?
I was just wondering, how come the moles don't slough off, rise to the surface and slough off with the rest of the skin?
Great question. How come moles don't just slough off? Well, because the mole is primarily melanocytes. But where do you find melanocytes?
In the body vessel.
In the basale, right? Or germinativum. Do melanocytes end up in the corneum?
No.
No. But the reason why moles look dark at the corneum level is that there's still melanin in those keratinocytes there. So what's weird about a mole is that you're actually looking at like a really high concentration of melanin in the keratinocytes there, when really the melanocytes are actually deeper, like deep underneath that mole. If that
Maybe
makes sense.
shift around a little bit.
You can take a mole off though, like you can shave a mole off. And I've had a couple removed because they looked like they might have been cancerous. One on my chest and one on my side here, and they turned out to be benign, but they can be removed if you just remove that whole skin layer.
Is the root down there? Of
What-
the mole?
what
There's
root?
not a root in mold.
Well, the root. I mean, if you think of like a mole as having a root, the root is just the stratum basale, where the melanocytes would be. Yeah. Now, if that mole has like tendrils that go really deep and spread, and it looks like a crab, that's more likely to be cancer, because cancer is the Greek word for crab, and some cancers grow in a crab-like pattern. That's why it's called cancer. So if it has something that looks like roots, that's not a good thing.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh yeah, one more thing, you guys. Sunspots. Those are actually not due to sun exposure. It's actually a fungal infection from tinea versicolor. So sometimes fungal infections can make your skin look darker, like in a local area. And you see these commonly in elderly because they've lived long enough to accumulate this fungus, and it's difficult to remove the fungus. If that makes sense. So kind of interesting. Now this slide talks about different abnormal skin color or just sort of variations in skin color. You guys know albinism, right? So albinism, like when we talk about like albinos, that's a condition, it's genetic, and it results from a complete lack of melanin. Okay. Now, do you only find human albinos? No, there's tons. You find albinism across the animal kingdom, right? There's like white tigers; those are albino tigers, right? You find like white snakes, and that's the name of a band, but like there's snakes that are like albinos, right? Now, albinism, you guys, is this sort of complete lack of melanin. It's inherited, so it's genetic. And so your hair will be white. The hair is white because there's no melanin in the hair. Skin's more pale, and irises of your eyes will be pink. Like the pigmented part of your eye will look more pink because instead of having melanin to give you eye color, they'll look more pink because of the blood vessels you find in your iris. So it'll look just more red like the blood vessels that are in there, which is interesting. So have you guys ever seen or met a human with albinism? You guys have. Interesting. Yeah, and you got to be really careful about sun exposure because they don't have melanin. They don't make their own natural sunscreen. So these guys can't spend a whole lot of time outside, and if they do, they got to wear really like UV protective clothing, like big hats, and just lather up that
I feel like you can
sunscreen
see, like, their veins, too.
because they're so prone to skin cancer, and because of that lack of melanin, their skin's more sort of translucent. You're right. You can see more veins and stuff. Yeah.
You said it's hereditary, right?
Yeah. So
yeah,
it,
well, I read that
it's genetic, and it can run in
like
families.
all-
Exactly.
all of them.
But what's important to know about albinism is that it's recessive. So what this means about albinism is you need to inherit two of the defective copies from melanin from both parents. The probability of that is more rare. Okay, I'll give you an example. The only way you can know 100% of the time that you will make an albino child is if both parents are also albino. Because then the only probability then is that the child can inherit either a defective copy from parent. But you can have an albino parent. Actually, I won't get into this yet, but we'll come back to genetics later, you guys. But it's recessive. And so what's weird is like sometimes these things just pop up in random populations. You could find like albino rats where like there's all of a sudden like, oh wait, there's an albino rat and it came from all these other rats that just look dark, right?
Yeah.
So it's just interesting. Yeah. Bronzing, you guys, is where this skin appears kind of a golden brown or copper color. This can come from glucocorticoid hormone deficiency. We call this Addison's disease. So if you don't make enough of this hormone, it can cause your skin, especially if your skin of your face, to look more bronzish. Okay, that's one of the signs of Addison's disease. Cyanosis, the color cyan is kind of bluish, right? So cyanosis is a bluing of skin. Why would skin become more blue? You got it, when it's deoxygenated. So deoxygenated blood, it's not blue. That's not true. Like when blood is deoxygenated, it does not turn blue. But it changes to a different shade of red, which through your skin appears to look more bluish, right? This is why we say veins kind of look bluish, because the shade of red that you find in that blood vessel, by the time the light gets through the vessel and through your skin, it looks kind of bluish. But there's no such thing as blue blood in humans. Now, there are animals that have blue blood, like these certain crabs have them, and it's because they don't use iron in their blood, they use copper. They have copper in their hemoglobin, which is interesting, instead of iron. Cyanosis, though, is just sort of a bluing of skin. You can find this with like airway obstruction or emphysema, any condition that's going to lead to sort of hypoxia or low oxygen levels in your blood. That can kind of bluing of skin. So erythema means a redness of skin. When would your skin become more reddish? Yeah, when you're working out, when you have increased blood flow to skin. When else? Yeah, embarrassed, pissed. It turns out embarrassed and pissed kind of cause the same physiological response that would cause, like a redness of your face and chest. And you say sunburn. Sunburn is due to skin damage, right? Your skin's actually literally being burned. In fact, a sunburn, it can be first, second degree, or third degree burn. We'll talk about that later. Now, what happens is if you're exposed to too much sun and it causes tissue damage, that leads to inflammation. And part of the inflammatory response is to increase blood flow to that tissue to bring in nutrients so the tissue can help heal faster. So you can also get a redness of skin or erythema due to inflammation. So if you have some skin inflammation, the local area can make that local area of skin look red. Like if I pinch my skin right now, really hard, for the sake of knowledge, and we'll come back and look at this in like 10 seconds. It should look more reddish, maybe. I don't know. All right, so hematoma, you guys, is actually basically just a leakage of blood out of a vessel in skin. So think about hematoma as a bruise. Now, what colors are bruises? Blue, purple,
Yellow.
even kind of yellowish. Yeah, exactly.
It's like a bad bruise.
Yeah, really bad bruises or really bad hematomas, especially on the outer edges. They get more yellow and kind of greenish, and it almost looks like your skin's rotting or something, right? Like it's that kind of green. That's not the case. What that kind of yellowish, greenish tinge of a hematoma is that blood is rich in hemoglobin. One of the breakdown products of hemoglobin is bilirubin, and bilirubin has a greenish, yellowish color to it. And so that's why when you start to heal that hematoma, actually my skin didn't turn red. Sorry guys, I thought it would. It's not. I don't think I'm gonna get inflammation there. I didn't pinch hard enough. You guys know what I'm saying though. But when you start to heal that hematoma and your immune cells are breaking apart the leaked blood, then they start to convert hemoglobin into bilirubin, which has more of a yellowish color, right? In fact, that's also what jaundice is. So jaundice up here is a yellowing of skin due to the accumulation of bilirubin in skin. Okay, so where does this bilirubin come from? Red blood cells. So it comes from hemoglobin, and hemoglobin, when it's broken apart, can turn into bilirubin. So we know it has something to do with liver. So what might we guess about the liver that could lead to jaundice? The liver must not be breaking down red blood cells. So maybe the red blood cells are breaking apart in your blood instead of being your liver. And so you end up having bilirubin now in your body's tissues. That could be exactly what happens. So we know that sometimes jaundice can be caused by liver failure. Not always, but sometimes. So not everyone who has jaundice has liver failure. We'll talk about this more in other classes. But jaundice is just sort of a yellowing of skin. Okay? And that can be due to an excess of bilirubin. You also find this sometimes in newborns. Right? And it can be a concern because in newborns, they don't have really strong blood vessels between their bloodstream and their brain tissue. And so what can happen is sometimes that bilirubin, bless you, can leak out of blood and enter that newborn's brain tissue. And it can cause a condition called kernicterus, which causes irreversible brain injury, trauma, and it can be fatal. So it's usually not much of a concern. It's so common that children are born with a lot of bilirubin. You just expose them to UV light and it helps break down the bilirubin. But if you don't, there's a concern that it could develop into kernicterus, which causes brain injury. So it's kind of interesting. And we'll come back to that later too. What about pallor? What's that?
Someone looks pale and white.
Yeah, sort of a paleness or a whiteness of
Lack
skin,
blood.
right? When do you guys ever see people who have like a whiteness of skin? Yeah, they might be scared, in shock.
Cold.
Now, physiological shock is different from being scared and being shocked. Okay, physiological shock is when your blood pressure basically drops out and you get no blood flow, and so then basically your skin having less blood flow gets sort of a whitish tinge, not even blue, more white. I've also seen this before, you guys. Like when people get really angry, you know, like sometimes they don't get red, sometimes their face gets white, right? You guys ever seen it before? Yeah. So it's kind of interesting. So what's yellowing of skin? Jaundice. What's that caused by? Bilirubin, which comes from hemoglobin. Good, red blood cells. In fact, you guys, this is why bile is green. So bile, which is one of the things that's secreted by your liver and aids in digestion, it's green because it's full of bilirubin. And your liver typically takes that breakdown product of hemoglobin and then puts it into bile, and you use the old little pieces of hemoglobin to digest fats. So it's kind of cool. What about erythema? Redness of skin. What causes erythema?
Exercise.
Basically things that are going to increase blood flow to skin, right? So that can be due to exercise, it could be due to heat exposure, which could both make your body hot, so you're going to want to dissipate that heat, or injury, right? From sun or other form of tissue injury, right? That can cause an increase in blood flow to skin. What about albinism?
White.
But no, not just white though, because there's a difference between pallor and albinism.
It's like a real lack of melanin.
Good. Albinism is a complete lack of melanin. How is it different from pallor?
Pallor is a temporary.
Good. It's due to a decrease in blood flow, and that's more of like a temporary sort of whitening of skin, okay, or lightening of skin. What about cyanosis?
Less, no oxygen.
Yep, bluing of skin. In fact, there's actually some people in Appalachia, and it's in this little community, you guys. And there's this community that lives in Appalachia. There's not a lot of pictures of them because they live like out in the woods, you know what I mean? But there have been some pictures taken, and these guys carry a genetic defect in hemoglobin. Their hemoglobin can't transfer oxygen that well. So it means that they're always kind of hypoxic. They always kind of have low oxygen levels in their bloodstream. And that makes their skin look blue. So if you look at these guys, they look really blue actually. You know, yeah, like Smurfs, exactly. So it's kind of interesting. You can Google them later if you're interested. You can look at it. And
Where are they?
somewhere in Appalachia, like in the backwoods. And because, you know, they're not really exposed to a lot of outside communities, this genetic defect kind of runs in the community because they're all sort of interrelated. You know, you're talking about like first, second cousins living in this local area. But because this genetic defect is so common, you find a lot of people with this blue skin there. It's kind of interesting. Oh, so you found it? Cool.
Oh.
Yeah, like, there's not a lot of pictures of them out there. I don't think they like to have their pictures taken either, because who wants to be like the freak show, right? You know, they're people too. So what about nevus? Nevus is also a mole, guys. It's a local overgrowth of melanocytes. What causes mole growth?
Melanin.
Well, yeah, increased melanocytes, but like what could cause an increase in melanocyte growth? Sun exposure. Or genetic factors, exactly. Sometimes you just maybe come from a moldy family, right?
Molly.
Yeah.
Or freckly, like some people.
Or freckly family, yeah.
Yeah.
You know, and hemangioma, that's basically a tumor of blood vessels. So what do you guys think a tumor of blood vessels would look like in your skin? If you get a lot of blood vessels growing in a local area, it's going to look like a bruise, right? But it's not a bruise. It's just a lot of blood vessels growing in that area. So these hemangiomas can be kind of reddish, they can be kind of purplish, right? So we call them there's like the strawberry hemangiomas, there's the port wine stain hemangiomas. We'll talk about this later when you guys take pathophysiology, quarters from
So
now.
they always form a benign tumor.
Yes, they're benign. And this is kind of like what a birthmark is. So a birthmark is a hemangioma.
I was gonna say some people have red birth.
Yeah, exactly.
on their-
And
yeah.
sometimes they go away, sometimes they don't. So it's kind of interesting. Now, friction ridges, which someone mentioned earlier, friction ridges are actually folds of epidermis. It's where the folds of the epidermis actually kind of fold around the dermal papilla. Okay? So friction ridges are fingerprints. Where do you find fingerprints?
On your fingertips.
Not just your fingers, though. Also your toes. We don't really typically talk about toe prints, but they exist. If you look at a toe, it's got little whorls and swirls and that kind of stuff, right? Now, these are actually due to the dermal papilla lining up in specific patterns. Then the epidermis folds over those papilla, and it causes a specific pattern of epidermis on your fingers and toes. And that's going to be for grasping. Yeah.
So in the case of like identical twins, would you still have different fingerprints?
I would say probably not.
Okay.
They're probably identical.
Cause like
I'm just guessing.
Yeah.
But the thing is,
Would it have the same?
I'm just guessing. I would guess that identical twins probably have the same fingerprint
Oh, wow.
because a lot of development's genetic.
Yeah.
But the thing about development too is there are some environmental factors. But the reason why I would guess they have the same fingerprints is that they have the same environment, intrauterine. So that's an excellent question. But the thing about fingerprints, you guys, they're not a good identification tool. Like there are people, even not identical twins, who can have identical fingerprints. Totally unrelated, totally separate people. But because there's only so many different combinations of fingerprints you can have, there are people out there that share the same fingerprint as you. So they're not a really good tool. Like they have been good in the past with what technology we had available. Like, you know, when you can just blow dust on something and be like, oh, I got print, right? You can get that print. Now we actually have better tools of identification like DNA and retinal scans and things that are more unique. So.
Everything I'm reading so far says they do not have the same fingerprint.
Oh, interesting. I'd be interested to know why they
Yeah.
don't. But here's what the fingerprints look like, you guys. Don't worry about understanding arch versus whorl versus loop or combination. Just know that this is caused by, these are called friction ridges. And why do they form a specific pattern?
Genetics?
No. Something more concrete than that. We have a specific pattern on your, why do you have a pattern on your fingers but not like your chest?
For friction to help you along.
Okay, good. They help you grip onto stuff. But what causes these prints or friction ridges? Say it again.
Papillary.
Good. The papillary layer. So what do we know about the papillary layer? What's the structure? Little pegs, little nipple-like structures, right? But they're all side by side. If you expected that all these papilla were just sort of evenly distributed, what would the epidermis look like when it folds over it? Kind of smooth, right? But what if the papilla lined up like in corn rows, right? What if all the papilla started to line up in
You
rows?
would get a specific pattern.
Then the epidermis folds over those papilla in that same pattern. So basically a fingerprint is the pattern of dermal papilla you find deep in the epidermis. It's just that you can kind of see it through the dermis.
And is it specifically
Or
on your
epidermis.
fingers because of grip? Or
Yeah,
so that's like-
apparently for grip, yeah. In fact, there's been experiments to figure out, well, you know, does someone grip better when their hands are wet and you get like, what do you call those?
I would say not.
What do you call them? Oh, pruned fingers.
Like if you
They
grip-
do,
grip
actually.
them, really?
Yeah, the experiment was they had people get pruned fingers and then try to grab marbles underwater, like the marbles are smooth.
Yeah, I guess maybe.
And then people who didn't have pruned fingers yet and try to grab those marbles, the people with pruned fingers could grab the marbles better than non-pruned fingers. So apparently it's like a gripping phenomenon. So it's interesting. So we're going to move on to next. You guys talk about the dermis. So there's two main layers of the dermis. We have the papillary and reticular layer. Which one's the thickest? Reticular, right? So it's 80% of the thickness. Papillary is 20%. Which one's more superficial?
Papillary.
Papillary, good. Which one's composed of areolar connective tissue? Papillary layer. And then the reticular layer is made of dense irregular connective tissue. Good. So let's check this out. So what this slide's showing you guys is if you can peel the epidermis away, and now you're just looking at dermis deep to that, right? And this is the subcutaneous tissue. But all of this is the dermis. And so you get the papillary layer of dermis right here, and then the reticular layer deep to it. Papillary layer of dermis contains not only just loose areolar connective tissue, but each dermal papilla could have a capillary loop. Capillaries are the smallest blood vessels in your body, and they actually kind of supply nutrients. So it makes sense to put capillary loops in the papilla. And then we also have these things called Meissner's corpuscles right here. And the Meissner's corpuscles are also called tactile corpuscles, and these are involved in touch. So each of these papilla could also have a Meissner's corpuscle, which is also involved with touch. So tactile sense. You find the papilla. Now, you also find some epidermal appendages, or dermal appendages. So we have this stuff like hair nearby. If you look at the structure of hair, all of us that surrounds it's called the follicle. But follow it up, you see that the follicle just looks like an extension of epidermis going deep, and it is. So the hair follicle is made of a stratified squamous epithelium. It's keratinized, and when it divides, those keratinized cells get pushed into the central region, which helps form the hair. And then this grows upward and outward, and that's what hair is. It's basically just a big old chunk of keratinized cells. But you don't find any nucleus or organelles in hair. So if you had a clipping of hair, there wouldn't be a lot of DNA on that clipping, right? Because there's no cells in hair. You might find a little bit of residual cells on the shaft of that hair, but like the hair shaft itself doesn't have any DNA. So it's kind of interesting. Now, in the dermis, you find things like sweat glands, which have a duct that empties on the surface of skin. You also got oil glands, like the sebaceous glands, which are associated with hair. And all of these have specific functions in the skin. So we talked about the papillary layer was more superficial. It's made of areolar connective tissue. These dermal papilla make the epidermal ridges. What's another word for epidermal ridge? Fingerprint. You got it. Or toe print, I guess. Do they take toe prints for babies? Is that a thing? Or do they only get fingerprints? They do a whole foot? Okay. What's the point of that? Why do they do that? Just memories? It's just like a thing? Like, okay. Oh, okay. I wasn't sure if they do that like after birth, like just to get like identification or something.
I don't think so.
Okay. I don't know when and where I've ever seen that, but it was in my mind. These dermal papilla contain capillary loops that help supply nutrients to the epidermis. We get the Meissner's corpuscles, also called tactile corpuscles. They're involved in tactile sense or touch. We also have free nerve endings in dermal papilla. These free nerve endings are involved in sensing pain and temperature. In fact, both pain and temperature use the same nerve ending. This is why things that are have a very extreme temperature, things that are kind of more extremely cold or extremely hot, can feel painful, right? Like I think we all understand why something that's extremely hot feels painful, because we understand that could damage our tissues. But things that are also extremely cold also feel painful. And so that pain and temperature are actually carried by the same nerve ending. And what's weird about this, you guys, is that these nerve endings, with respect to temperature, they're sensitive to temperature change. Okay? So what does this mean then if you go and have a large change in temperature? Even if that's not necessarily going to damage your skin, it can still feel painful. Like, have you guys ever had a situation where maybe you were getting into a hot tub at first, and it hurts? You're like, it's like burns, right? But it's not even like that hot. Like, we understand that it's not like so hot they're going to boil yourself, but it feels like that when you first started getting in, because you're seeing there's a temperature change from what your body temperature was to the hot tub temperature, and because there's a large temperature change, it feels painful, even though there's not necessarily any damage occurring. It's kind of interesting. Or have you guys ever like jumped into snow and it starts hurting?
Or the pool after the jacuzzi.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, that's a great example. A pool after getting out of the jacuzzi, right? The pool hurts because then it feels really cold, even though it's not that cold. It's like a normal sort of, maybe room temperature. Yeah, but it's that change that makes it hurt, which is weird. In the reticular layer of dermis, you guys, it's mostly dense, irregular connective tissue. You got large bundles of collagen fibers, blood vessels, glands, hair follicles, and nerves. And we'll talk about the functions of these. As a protein, what was collagen good for? Strength. You got it. So all this collagen, the dermis, gives the dermis some strength. If someone has weak skin or loose skin, it could be because they have less collagen. And this is one of the consequences of aging. Like, you start to lose collagen as you age, But there are things you can do to help increase the amount of collagen that you have in your skin. In fact, you hear about like people getting collagen injections. There's lasers now that can like stimulate the growth of collagen. And basically, you can slow down the process of skin aging by stimulating collagen growth. That makes your skin tougher and less likely to sag, if that makes sense. So Kind of interesting. Now, stretch marks and wrinkles and lens cleavage. So collagen elastic fibers, you guys, are typically oriented in like parallel bundles. Okay, and the purpose of having collagen elastic fibers, bless you, arranged in these bundles is it helps resist stresses, and we'll talk about this. They're called lines of cleavage. And so if you guys look at your skin up close, like really closely, you see that skin will sag in a particular direction, right? Like if you look at the skin of your chest, you'll find the skin of your chest kind of sags oblique towards the midline, right? Or if you look at the skin of your trunk, it kind of just goes across like this. Or the skin of your thigh just kind of goes down. It never goes to the sides, just goes straight down, right? Well, the reason why skin can sag in different ways is due to what we call these lines of cleavage, which are due to the collagen elastic bundles you find in skin. And because these are arranged in parallel bundles, they help with skin in specific directions. And these cause, like I said, these lines of cleavage, which are important to consider during surgery. Because you want to cut with the lines of cleavage, not against the lines of cleavage. Because if you're cutting with the way these collagen fibers are going, you're cutting along that, then you're less likely to cut through a lot, right? You're just cutting through some, not all of them. But if you cut against the grain, like if you go against the way the collagen fibers are going, it's harder to heal, right? And your skin's going to be pulled apart in that direction the collagen fibers are. So that's one reason why it takes longer to heal. So these lines of cleavage are important to consider if you're doing like a biopsy or cutting through skin in some regard, because you don't want to go against the lines of cleavage if you can avoid that. Okay. Now, striae, or stretch marks, is basically where the skin's overstretched. Collagen fibers may tear and start to reform. It kind of causes a type of scar tissue that looks like kind of these white lines. We call that linea alba. Alba means white, like albinism. And linea means line. So linea alba are basically white lines or stretch marks. It's when skin gets stretched too much, right? So one thing that can also damage the collagen in skin, you guys, UV exposure. So getting exposed to a lot of UV makes the collagen in skin break down more quickly. And what's going to happen if your skin has less collagen? It's going to be weaker, and it's going to sag more, right? You're going to see more like wrinkles and kind of loose skin. In fact, one of the things I first noticed when I first moved to Colorado, there's no offense to Coloradans, you guys, like I've lived here for 11 years, so I kind of consider myself a Coloradan, is that people look weathered. And I think it's because the sun here is so intense that just like our skin takes a beating. And like I look at when I first looked at Colorado, I'm like, man, these guys look really like wrinkly and like weathered, like they're out in the sun a lot, right? And it's not necessarily because we're out in the sun more than other states. I think it's just because the sun here is so intense, it damages our collagen, our dermis, and so we look aged more quickly. We look more sun exposed, so it's kind of interesting. And you hear about people like just love to like sunbathe, you know. They might have like healthy looking skin early on in life, but it's gonna catch up with them later. You know, like I know my friends that still live in like sunny states where they love to go sunbathe because it's like supposed to be like cool to have like tan skin. They're already starting to look pretty weathered. So it's just interesting. So here are the lines of cleavage, you guys. And what are these lines of cleavage made of? Collagen and elastic fibers, right? So if the lines go this way, what does this tell us about the collagen elastic fibers?
They're going the same.
They go that same way. Good. So what if you had a cut going against those fibers?
It'd be harder to heal.
You got it, because the skin's going to pull apart in the direction of those fibers, so it's going to take longer to heal. The scar is going to be worse. It's more likely to form a keloid type of scar. Good. So what's important to note, you guys, is that if you can make an incision, it's important to consider what the lines of cleavage are, because you want to go with those lines of cleavage, which means the skin won't pull the wound apart, and you're less likely to cut through as much collagen, so the wound will heal much more quickly, right? Now, I don't expect you guys to memorize where these lines of cleavage are. Like on the trunk, what is the direction of the lines of cleavage? That's kind of silly. But look how complex the face is. That's why like people who do plastic surgery on faces, like that's an art form. Yeah, it's art. That's art. Who's that?
McSteamy?
Yeah.
Plastic surgery in Grey's Anatomy.
Oh, okay. That's funny.